haben uns verraten. Die haben die Brücke gesprengt. Die wollen uns hier verrecken lassen.
Das weißt du nicht, Kerz. Komm, wir müssen jetzt...
Was? Stärke zeigen. Hä? Ach Gott, doch mal. Sieh dich doch um, Peter. Gott, steh uns bei. Alles, woran wir geglaubt haben. Alles, was wir dafür getan haben. Es ist vorbei.
It's safe to say many gamers were kind of underwhelmed with Battlefield 5. Me, myself, I liked it enough, and I really liked the Japan DLC, but the original game was very lacking, especially because Battlefield 1 is one of my favourite shooters of the last probably like 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, maybe ever. I just, absolutely love this game. Have so much, hours in it, just love all the classes, all the weapons. Battlefield 5 felt a lot less polished, but today what I want to talk about is actually its German campaign. Now, I've actually made a video about this before. I'm going to get into all that, but I thought it was an interesting topic to come back to. Now, what we're going to do in the video is talk about my original video on this, talk about the Wehraboos' response to it, then actually analyse this campaign with a bit more perspective, I feel like, because I know more about the topic now. This original video came out like 2.5 years ago. And then we're just going to talk about how Battlefield 5's German campaign, The Last Tiger, really helps prop up this Clean Wehrmacht myth, which is actually pretty dominant in online spaces, particularly in like World War II fan communities. I've made numerous videos on this topic, so if you want to, browse through my channel, hopefully I'll stick some stuff on like cards floating around the screen right now. And you can go check out another video I've done on this stuff, including ones on Rommel. Before we get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible, pledging little amounts like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit, where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. We are so close to 35k, finally. I knew it was going to happen in June. I think we're about 180 subs or so away. For every 5k, I get a new chocolate orange. People ask me this all the time, but I live stream 2 times a week. The live streams get archived on the Kavernacle Extra eventually. Sometimes they take quite a long time to actually upload to the channel's private server. So if you care about that stuff, go subscribe to that channel. So I released this video back in, I think, late 2018. It was titled A Nazi Campaign Without the Nazis, Battlefield 5 The Last Tiger Review. Basically what I did in this video was just talk about the campaign, give my general opinion on it, and a general review, sticking various clips of footage that I recorded in there. It wasn't like a complete analysis, but my main point essentially was, for some weird reason, in a campaign that's set around like the last days of the war from a German perspective in Germany itself, the absence of both Nazi imagery, Nazi language, Nazi propaganda, and even Adolf Hitler himself is very obvious. And I feel like if this was purposeful to avoid maybe backlash or something like that, it has done a bad job because it helps prop up the Clean Wehrmacht myth. Now, you guys might be asking, what is this myth? And let me spell it out for you. So basically, the myth of the Clean Wehrmacht is the fictitious notion that the regular German armed forces, the Wehrmacht, were not involved in the Holocaust or other war crimes during World War II. The myth denies the culpability of the German military command in the planning and preparation of war crimes, even where the perpetration of war crimes and the waging of a war of extermination, particularly in the USSR, where the Nazis viewed the population as subhumans ruled by Jewish Bolsheviks, conspirators, has been acknowledged, but they ascribe this to party soldiers, the SS, not the regular German military. The myth's formation began at the International Military Tribunal held between the 20th of November 1945 and the 1st of October 1946, Franz Halder and other Wehrmacht leaders signed the General's Memorandum entitled The German Army from 1920 to 1945, which laid out its key elements, and the memorandum was an attempt to exculpate the Wehrmacht from war crimes. Western powers were becoming increasingly concerned with the growing Cold War and wanted West Germany to begin rearming to counter the perceived Soviet threats. In 1950, the West German Chancellor and former officers in the Wehrmacht met to discuss West Germany's rearmament and agreed upon the Himmerod Memorandum. This memorandum laid out the conditions under which West Germany would rearm. Their war criminals must be released, the defamation of the German soldier must cease, and foreign public opinion of the Wehrmacht must be transformed. Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had previously described the Wehrmacht as Nazis, changed his mind to facilitate this, and the British essentially stopped pursuing further trials. Now, the very depressing thing you learn as you get older is that the image of World War II being a fight between good versus evil is extremely tainted when you find out the Western Allies basically let off nearly everyone who did the Holocaust to make them fight leftists. So you have German military commanders put straight into the West German military and completely rehabilitated, completely sanitized, their role in war crimes and the Holocaust omitted. And that is where this myth about Rommel also comes from. They needed a good German, and they could paint Rommel as this German who fought Hitler, who'd gone too far, and he tried to stop him, and that's why Hitler made him commit suicide. So Rommel to them was a very helpful symbol, someone they could politicize in his death, as an example of Germans who were good in the war. Not to mention also like various collaborators were let off the hook and then put in positions of power in places like Greece, for example. Most of the Jewish Greek population was killed by the Nazis and Greek collaborators. Most of the Greek collaborators were then backed by the West to fight communists. And that is the awful thing about the Cold War and stuff we're not taught about. Basically, everyone who was a fascist war criminal or a Nazi war criminal was probably let off just to fight communists. You have that in Japan. Probably the worst example is America promising Ho Chi Minh and Vietnam independence if they fought the Vichy French and the Japanese, only for the Americans, French and British to turn round and actually use the surrendered Japanese forces to fight the Viet Minh, just to show you the complete hypocrisy and how much these guys use people, and how at the end of the day, the real threat that countries like America and countries like Britain cared about above all else was threats to capitalism, embodied by the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. But this has been very effective propaganda, and I got loads of Wehraboos flooding the comments. So Colonel Hogan Film, who actually has a profile picture of a German soldier, says most soldiers that experienced war to the extent of the German soldiers just wanted to live and go home. Also put modern day America in 2018. People hate President Trump and what he stands for. This is common knowledge. But saying that German soldiers are Nazis because of the government they fight for, the military serving all believe in everything Trump stands for, absolutely ludicrous. It sucks that many Germans died for nothing and had no choice in their fate. Now, this is a ridiculous notion. Nazi Germany was a totalitarian state, one-party state, ruled by the Nazi Party, ruled by the dictator Adolf Hitler. If you're fighting for them, you're fighting for the Nazis. Doesn't matter if you're the most fanatical or not. If you're in the German military, carrying out the Nazi Party's genocidal, ambitions, then you're just as good as a Nazi, even if you're not as the most fanatical thing. Like the Clean Wehrmacht myth states, is that people often forget the war of the Soviet Union to the Nazis was a race war. They both called the Soviets like Asiatic hordes, and that's a myth spread by the Wehrmacht that still, is around today, that the Soviets just won through sheer numbers, and that they were either Jews or they were controlled by the Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. The Germans weren't too fond of taking prisoners in the Eastern Front, and they were very happy to burn down villages, kill civilians in pursuit of, Tito and his partisans, or just general, red-aligned partisans or Jewish partisans. They were very happy to do these things. So while you can maybe point out the differences between the SS and the Wehrmacht, it's totally ridiculous to pretend that the average Wehrmacht soldier was just fighting for his family and his friends and his nation, which he loved, and he was very apolitical. But this is something the Battlefield campaign really plays into, so we're going to get into that a bit later. Other people saying, it's not a Nazi campaign, it's a German Wehrmacht campaign. You can't say it's the same. Yes, I can. So not every Wehrmacht soldier hates Jews. Some just wanted to fight for their country. They wanted to prevent the fate of Germany, which was for the Soviets to win, and the Soviets weren't any better than the Nazis. They were also fighting for the same purpose as anyone else to defend their country. Another comment talking about the Soviets being worse, saying that the Germans were welcomed as liberators when they entered Russia. Only certain places welcomed the Germans, and maybe like Ukrainian nationalists might have liked them, but actual Russians didn't, because like I said, this is like a race war to the Germans. Someone else saying there's a difference between a Nazi and a German soldier. Another person saying Nazis and Nazism isn't really placed in this campaign, quoting me. Yeah, guess what? It's because for the soldiers, they didn't fight for Hitler, they fought for their country. Someone else saying, so because Müller fought against the Allies for years, he should be somewhat sympathetic to the Nazis. What about Rommel? He fought both the Americans and British, and he fought throughout most of World War II before his death. He gradually got disillusioned with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi state. Again, that's a lie. Rommel was just chosen by the people who tried to assassinate Hitler as the new leader. He probably didn't know anything about it. He didn't get disillusioned with Hitler and the Nazi party because he was some sort of anti-Nazi, anti-racist. In fact, he was involved in campaigns that exterminated Jews in North Africa. So just one more. You say all Germans were Nazis in that time, but not all Germans were Nazis. Most just fought for their fatherland. Again, this is just totally ridiculous logic and shows how much the Clean Wehrmacht myth has really been spread. That somehow all the Wehrmacht soldiers were completely apolitical and just fought for their fatherland and to defend the fatherland. And that's it. None of them hated Jews. None of them were racist. None of them did what the Nazi party said, despite obviously Hitler often taking direct control of military campaigns. They never did any of that. They never committed atrocities against Jewish people. They never burned down whole villages looking for partisans or anything like that. Very apolitical, honourable soldier, just like Rommel, the good Rommel, who hated Hitler so much he tried to kill him. Again, all written by Wehrmacht veterans who were placed in positions of power in NATO and in West Germany's government and military. Literally written by these guys to try and rehabilitate the Wehrmacht so people like Britain and France and loads of countries that had suffered at the hands of them could be manipulated into thinking that they weren't all bad. So now I got my notes here. I'm going to play you the clips I'm going to reference. But now let's get on to the last Tiger campaign. What these guys were so mad about. So the campaign sees you play as this tank commander called Peter Müller. Now he was actually in a little intro sequence in the original Battlefield campaign. Because this game had a lot of problems in development, it seems like they just cut off his campaign because it wasn't done yet. So he's in that, and also the start of The Last Tiger starts off with him fighting in North Africa and destroying Allied tanks. And he opens up with this little monologue talking about how when he was younger, he was with his friends and they stole something from a shop. And his father said, the problem was you were there with them, so it's like you're complicit.
Als ich ein Kind war, wurde eine Gruppe von Jungs im Dorfladen beim Klauen erwischt. Mein Vater war außer sich, als er davon erfuhr. Aber ich hab doch gar nichts gestohlen. Vielleicht, sagte er. Aber du warst dort.
And what I don't like about this is that it's sort of saying that, like, because Peter is in like the Wehrmacht and he's there in this time with the Germans, he's like guilty by association, but he's not actually guilty for any war crimes or anything like this. This guy's like a career soldier in the Wehrmacht who fights for at least 3 years from North Africa to Germany. I don't like this framing to start with because it's already trying to separate this guy and him in the military away from the Nazi stuff. So it opens with them about to go into battle, has a speech going over the radio telling people to fight to the last man. It's not an Adolf Hitler speech. There is also no Nazi iconography. There is no swastikas present. It's all an iron cross, even on the flags. It looks pretty ridiculous in the context of this. So you have a couple other characters. You have Hertz, who's like the tank driver. You have Schroeder, who's like a new recruit, a young guy who's meant to be fanatical. And you have Hartmann, basically not even a character, just a guy who has PTSD. Now, Müller does reference the party line at the start. That's pretty much the only reference to Nazism.
Muss der dir eigentlich die ganze Zeit hinterherlaufen wie ein streunender Hund? Er ist noch ein Kind. Dann hast du ihm ja bestimmt die Parteilinie erklärt. Ich habe ihn nur daran erinnert, wer wir sind, Kerz.
And the new recruit talks about trusting strength and trusting Germany, and Müller says they should stay stronger together. Now, I find this kind of hard to believe that there's really no mention of Nazism at all in this context, like nothing, not even the iconography. And this guy called Hertz is very disillusioned at the end of the game. We're going to get back to that because I have a massive problem with his little speech at the end. So then the campaign goes on. You play through this game. You're attacking Americans, battling Sherman tanks in your Tiger. Later on, you start to see images of deserters and people being hung for desertion or people being escorted away to be executed for desertion. They have signs around their neck. It looks like, from like translated, that it says, "I have refused to fight." And Schroeder says they get what they deserve and we are stronger together.
Die kriegen das, was sie verdienen. Scheiß Feiglinge.
Gemeinsam sind wir stärker, vergessen Sie das nicht.
So the obvious dynamic of the squad is like Peter Muller is like the guy who's seen it all. Hertz is like the disillusioned tank driver. Schroeder is like the more fanatical Hitler Youth style guy, although Hitler Youth is never mentioned. If this guy is meant to be like one of these young Hitler Youth recruits and one of the young people used in the last days of the war, because of course in the last days of the war Germany basically made every able-bodied boy and man fight from a very young age to a very old age. So if he's meant to be this fanatical Hitler Youth Nazi, don't get that across with anything he says, even though it's implied basically from how he's acting in this context. Doesn't say anything about Nazism, Hitler, anything like that. So again, it's very, very strange. So later, Hartmann has PTSD and basically Muller and Schroeder send him out to be a scout.
Nicht lange halten können. Jemand muss da raus, uns einen Weg suchen.
Schicken Sie Hartmann.
Wovon zur Hölle reden Sie da? Der Mann ist nicht in der Verfassung.
Vertrauen Sie auf unsere Stärke. Das waren doch eure Worte, oder? Keine Schwäche, keine Sentimentalitäten.
Oh, Herrgott nochmal.
Sie sind so wichtig. Das können wir nicht riskieren. Und ich bediene das Geschütz.
Dann mache ich das eben.
Nein, Sie müssen fahren. Aber Hartmann, der ist doch eh angeschlagen. Austauschbar.
Wollen Sie ihn wirklich da rausschicken?
Hartmann!
Ja?
Steigen Sie aus dem Panzer. Suchen Sie uns da draußen einen Weg ins Freie.
Herrgott nochmal, Müller, nein, der Mann ist nicht in der Verfassung.
Bitte, Peter. Ich kann wirklich
Raus aus dem Panzer, Hartmann. Ich möchte, dass Sie Ihre Pflicht tun.
Maybe some sort of like implied eugenic stuff here, that because he has PTSD, he is now dispensable and he's not fit for purpose in this military. Maybe, although I didn't really read it like this. This is, only me because I know about German history and stuff, thinking this stuff. And then you hear another speech on the radio later, a speech about protecting the fatherland. Hartmann gets hung for being a deserter, and Schroeder basically says he deserves it because he's a deserter.
Hartmann? Dieser Idiot!
Halten Sie den Mund. Er hat seine Pflicht getan, wie befohlen.
Seine Pflicht? Nein, er war ein Verräter.
Einer von uns.
Fahren Sie weiter zum Hauptquartier.
Now I'm going to get back to the deserting point a bit later as well. Now, Muller says once him and his men are safe, he can reassess his views on this stuff. Views on the conflict. What a nice guy.
Sobald meine Männer in Sicherheit sein würden, würde ich Zeit haben, über alles nachzudenken und die Lage zu bewerten. Das redete ich mir jedenfalls ein.
Now, Schroeder also continually refuses to surrender to the Americans, does this twice. Now, basically, after all the tank battles, your tank is pretty destroyed. Kurtz gets out of the tank. Muller points a gun at him, because he's trying to desert as well. And Kurtz says stuff like, "The things we believed, Peter, the things we have done."
Die haben uns verraten. Die haben die Brücke gesprengt. Die wollen uns hier verrecken lassen.
Das weißt du nicht, Kerz. Komm, wir müssen jetzt...
Was? Stärke zeigen. Hä? Herrgott doch mal. Sieh dich doch um, Peter. Gott, steh uns bei. Alles, woran wir geglaubt haben. Alles, was wir dafür getan haben. Es ist vorbei.
Nein, Kerz. Komm, Tu das nicht, Kerz.
Only to be shot by Schroeder, who says, you know, we're stronger together, the weak don't survive, before Muller eventually takes off his cross and he's prepared to surrender to the Americans.
War ein Verräter.
Kerz! Kerz!
Ich weiß, er war ein Freund, aber er ist desertiert. Gemeinsam sind wir stärker, richtig? Die Schwachen überleben nicht. Das waren doch ihre Worte, oder? Sagen Sie's! War das nicht so? Just give up, damn it!
At the end, it actually quotes Adolf Hitler, but it doesn't attribute the quote to him for some strange reason. I don't know why they would leave out who said this. So I'll read it for you now. We will not capitulate. No, never. We may be destroyed, but if we are, we shall drag a world with us, a world in flames. Then it says, afterwards in the text, German soldiers fought under oath of unconditional obedience to their leader. Most did exactly what they were told. Now, it would be nice if DICE, before, you know, they showed us this quote, which they don't attribute to anyone, they made this a theme in it, because I do not get the theme that these soldiers, like Schroeder, are fighting out of obedience to the Nazi party and Hitler. So let's get to my problems with this stuff, right? So Schroeder is a fanatic, but he's not a fanatical Nazi in this context because he really doesn't allude to any Nazi ideology. Now, he simply agrees with traitors and deserters being shot. This is something that was pretty common practice in World War I throughout all the armies. It was also pretty common in World War II. Not as common, but deserters, yes, were often executed. But in the context of this campaign, and if you don't know the history behind this stuff, or if you're indoctrinated by the Clean Wehrmacht history, is there anything Schroeder does which is so wrong? He simply says that, you know, these guys are cowards for refusing to defend the fatherland. They're cowards for refusing to defend Germany. They should stand and fight with us because we're stronger together. Him killing deserters and, you know, being pro-killing deserters doesn't make Nazism seem like uniquely evil and isn't really a commentary on Nazism at all. So don't throw this quote at me at the end that German soldiers fought under an oath of unconditional obedience, when what this guy is doing is simply agreeing with people who are deserting when their country's been invaded being shot, right? And don't throw this quote from Hitler at me when you literally do not touch on Nazism at all in this campaign. So that is a big thing for me, right? If you're trying to make a point about how this total fanaticism to this ideology undermines reason, because it results in Peter Muller dying, right? He gets shot by Schroeder because Schroeder won't surrender and thinks anyone who deserts is a traitor. But show me the root of that stuff. Show me why this guy is so fanatical. Why doesn't he talk about anything to do with Nazism? Why doesn't he talk about anything, basically? The stuff he says is so, not apolitical, but can be put in the context of many different war scenarios. But they've literally chosen to set this German campaign in the last days of the war in Germany following this tank crew. So I think how it helps play into the Clean Wehrmacht myth is, although this guy is a fanatic, and although in their head they're probably trying to show us this Hitler youth, someone who's completely grown up in Nazi Germany, how fanatical he is, the only thing he supports and does is killing deserters. Do you have to be a Nazi to kill deserters? Would it be totally out of place for many soldiers on all sides to be pro-killing deserters? I don't think it's a sentiment you would only find in Nazi Germany. But then that's other parts that I really disagree with. So the Hertz character is seen to be this remorseful guy, right? So he's like, the things we believed, Peter, the things we have done. Now, him and Peter Muller are quite good friends, so we assume they've been serving together for a while. But I think it's totally ridiculous for this guy, on his deathbed essentially, to make this confession the things we believed, the things we've done, so awful. Why did we do them? I guess we were, led astray by the Nazis. And it also plays into the Clean Wehrmacht stuff because he has lots of regret. It's like we're placing ourselves in this situation with this guy, right? He's meant to be like us. But I don't think there'd be too many Wehrmacht soldiers who, before they're just about to surrender, would be crying about what they did. A lot of these people, even if they didn't necessarily totally believe the Nazi ideology, they often did like the Nazis because they were seen as, you know, making Germany powerful again and like restoring their military might and stuff. You have that a lot with the old school people who fought in the First World War, who got on board with the Nazi regime, even, you know, people like the Kaiser before he died during Hitler's initial reign. But like the Clean Wehrmacht myth shows, a lot of them had no regrets. A lot of them rewrote the history of the war to make themselves look better. A lot of them got cushy jobs in West Germany and NATO. These people didn't have to apologise. So it's kind of like a modern thing. We're making this guy seem remorseful. This older guy who's the tank driver, he can't believe what he's done in this war. He can't believe, you know, he's so sorry for it. I'm sorry. I think the only thing this serves as like rehabilitating these guys and making them, you know, seen as these clean Wehrmacht. These guys who just got caught up in a situation that was far beyond them, and they served with honour and distinction while helping the Nazis carry out genocide and conquest across Europe and the rest of the world. Come on, please. I think this is such a bad example of a character. I don't mind doing a character like this who might be like, you know, as Nazi Germany is exploding, imploding all around him, he's like, we bought into this stuff and they basically failed us, these leaders. They promised us glory, they promised us they'd make Germany great, and now look what's happened. I don't mind that so much, but, you know, the fact that he's very regretful for everything, I don't think that's a very good use of his story, because I'm sure maybe some were regretful, but this is literally, you know, the one German campaign we've had in a modern AAA game, and basically all you've done is sanitize and make these guys seem like honourable. And to get to that point a bit further, Peter Muller, I have a massive problem with as a character, because he seems very apolitical, right? Just, I'm the honourable soldier, and I will carry out my duty as a soldier, and I've got no time for politics, no comment on Hitler, no comment on the Nazis, I will just kill hundreds of Americans in this campaign who are fighting for freedom, and I won't really have an opinion on that. And then maybe I'll surrender at the end because I realise it's over, but I don't really have many regrets. And, you know, I don't really like this fanatical Schroeder guy who's just killed my pal and supports, you know, killing deserters. But again, I'm kind of above it all. Now, this guy isn't even like the depictions of Rommel in the Clean Wehrmacht myth. He's not even like someone who hates Nazism. So I think it's a very weird character to even make us, you know, playable. I would prefer a lot more if he did sort of buy into the Nazi ideology a bit more, and then at the end, he sees it for what it is, or maybe sees, you know, how the Nazis have led them all astray. I don't mind that sort of character progression, but when you just show us a guy, he's fighting in 1942, he fights in 1945, never changes, never questions it, never criticises the Nazis, never criticises the leadership in the war, just does his job and then he surrenders, and I'm meant to feel bad for this guy. I don't feel bad for this guy. He's killed hundreds and hundreds of Allied soldiers while I've been playing as him. But I think as a story where you are depicting a conflict like this, you have a responsibility to tell it a certain way. Not saying you can't do what you want, but to first totally omit the Nazism from a story is just mind-boggling. I can't understand it. Why would you not talk about Nazism in this story? You must have really bought into the Clean Wehrmacht myth if you think the last days of the war, where they made children and old men fight, the Nazis did. And you talk about Adolf Hitler in the last little quote without referencing him. So you acknowledge this as part of it, but then you say nothing. There's not even iconography. There's nothing like that. And all the characters you show us from the German perspective, there's nothing really bad about them. Peter Muller is like honourable and aloof and apolitical. Kurtz has regrets. That Hartmann is just a young guy with PTSD. And that Schroeder guy, for as much as he's meant to be like the villain, the only bad thing he does is kill deserters. He doesn't do anything else that's that bad. He doesn't kill civilians, doesn't talk about, you know, Jewish people, doesn't talk about like this race war stuff most Germans believed in with, you know, the Soviet Union. I know they're fighting the Americans in this instance. So I think the responsibility when you're telling a story like this is to not sanitize it, not make it seem like the Wehrmacht had nothing to do with the Nazis, while at the same time acting like the reason people like Schroeder were so fanatical is because of their oath of obedience to Adolf Hitler, but then throughout the campaign, not show us that. These guys have no loyalty to Hitler. They have no loyalty to the Nazi Party. They only seem to have loyalty to each other and to maybe a vague notion of fatherland as it's being invaded. It really just plays into the Clean Wehrmacht. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't give me a campaign where you don't mention the Nazis and Hitler and then throw me an Adolf Hitler quote right at the end and say the reason these guys didn't surrender is because they had an oath of obedience to the Nazi Party, where basically every character in the game doesn't seem to have any affinity for the Nazi Party. It doesn't seem like they'd go out their way to fight to the death for the loyal Nazis. Now, can you humanise Nazi characters? Do they have to be completely cartoonishly evil? Now, a show I like is Man in the High Castle on Amazon, right? And one of the main characters is actually an American who joins the Nazis. And I think that does a really good job at both humanising Nazis, but both showing why they're so bad. And you can do that. You don't have to say, like, if you are a good Nazi, or if you're not the worst one there, that you're not actually a Nazi, so let's detach you. You're actually the Wehrmacht who didn't really have much to do with the Nazis. You can do this. The Man in the High Castle makes you feel very conflicted, and it shows you, you know, how these people and why they do these things to join the Nazis and different motivations for joining them. And it shows you the different degrees of Nazism, but again, shows you really how these guys are all pretty complicit in the end, even with the more like moderate people. It does show you how they're complicit in this genocidal system. Anyway, if you weren't aware of this stuff, if you weren't aware of the Clean Wehrmacht myth or the stuff about Rommel, hopefully you're aware of it now. Let me know what you guys think of the Battlefield 5 campaign. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram, come check out my Discord and my subreddit as well. And if you want to support my work continuing, please check out my Patreon. And if you made it this far, thank you all for watching.